Hi, I'm Jeff Holden. Welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast Network. Our purpose and passion is to highlight a nonprofit organization in each weekly episode, giving that organization an opportunity to tell their story in their words to better inform and educate the respective communities they serve, as well as provide one more tool for them to share their message to constituents and donors. Our goal is to help build stronger communities through shared voices and to both encourage and support the growth of local nonprofit organizations through podcasting. Thanks to our founding partners for their foresight in helping us transform the way conversations start. CapTrust, fiduciary advice for endowments and foundations. Runyon Saltzman Incorporated, RSE, marketing, advertising, and public relations creating integrated communications committed to improving lives. And Western Health Advantage, a full-service healthcare plan for individuals, employer groups, and families. Human trafficking is a pervasive and insidious crime that affects millions of individuals worldwide, stripping them of their basic rights and freedoms. Victims, often lured by false promises of employment or a better life, find themselves trapped in exploitative situations where they're forced into labor or sexual exploitation. We tend to commonly think of this from the sex crime perspective, but it's also labor. This modern-day slavery transcends borders and socioeconomic backgrounds, affecting vulnerable populations, including children, who may lack the resources, support, or capability to escape their dire circumstances. The clandestine nature of trafficking networks, coupled with the stigma and fear faced by victims, makes it a complex issue to combat. So much is required to address this crisis that it requires a multifaceted approach, combining education, legal reform, victim support services, and a web of communication to begin to dismantle trafficking rings and provide survivors with the tools to rebuild their lives. Ashlie Bryant is one of those people who was not only impacted, but stepped deeply into the human trafficking nightmare with an intent to make a difference, knowing step one was prevention, and the other steps that followed were focused on support of the victims. Ashlie is the co-founder, president, and CEO of 3Strands Global Foundation, working to improve the awareness and education of what human trafficking really is, its prevention and support for those impacted by it. And with January being Human Trafficking Awareness Month, how appropriate we've been able to have her join us for this very necessary conversation. Ashlie Bryant, welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast Network.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to talk with you today because I remember when I was at the radio stations, KFBK in particular, now 2010, that would have been, so almost 15 years ago, I remember you coming in to talk to Kitty O'Neill about this program.
Yes.
And I think all of us were shocked and mortified that this is happening in our community. And it's not selective. It's not specific. It's not geo-targeted or socioeconomic.
Right.
It's everywhere.
That's correct.
It's prevalent everywhere. Let's get into the discussion. Before we get too deep into the why of the organization, can you tell me how you came up with 3Strands Global as a title?
Yeah. So we focus on 3 different initiatives: education, employment, and engagement. We talk a lot in threes, but really it is those 3 areas of focus. And a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. So all 3 of those things woven together, uniquely, 3Strands has the ability to have employment influence education, education influence employment, engagement, which is advocacy and policy, influence both. So all of those 3 woven together is really strong.
So everything's intertwined in a fabric that's woven so tight.
That's right.
That it doesn't separate.
That's right.
Tell me the genesis of the organization. What brought it to be? What was it that prompted you to act?
Yeah, my background is in high-tech marketing communications, telephony. That's what I had done before. And unfortunately, in 2008, my good friend's daughter was trafficked from a sleepy suburb here in Greater Sacramento. And that really launched me, and there were 4 of us together to co-found 3Strands Global Foundation. And the idea was, because of what had happened to her, how could this be happening in our community, let alone the United States, based off the research we did? She was sold on Craigslist. She was trafficked and bought 15 to 20 times a day by men who were seeking to have sex with minors, and that just wasn't okay. And so for the four of us that sat around my kitchen table, it was a conversation of what can we do? And so the idea of prevention is what surfaced. How can we prevent this crime from happening? Stop it before it starts.
I'm just shocked at the numbers you just shared in a day for a minor. That's wrong.
Yeah.
That is just wrong.
Yes.
And she was recovered?
She was recovered. She was 17 years old. She was recovered. She was in the Bay Area, brought back to Sacramento. But back then, as you can imagine, I mean, we are, almost 20 plus years from that time, or almost there. And there wasn't a lot of services. There weren't, the counseling component, what didn't exist. Today, where we are is a very different place than we were that many years ago. And so the idea of what can we do to make survivors' lives easier, thriving, what component can we play in this, as well as how do we stop it before it happens, really was the conversation originally that we were having. Back
to the prevention and education.
Right.
And how lucky she was only in the Bay Area, not somewhere across the globe.
Right. Well, it was law enforcement who recovered her. So she was recovered and brought back to Greater Sacramento. And that's when we really understood that what you led this conversation with is this is a crime that hides in plain sight. This is a crime that doesn't discriminate on socioeconomics. It doesn't discriminate on location or race or anything. It is a crime of greed and power and control, and it's a business.
Speaking of business, you actually have a number for what this is globally as an industry.
Yes.
Which is?
50 million people are trafficked or exploited, enslaved in the world, and it is a $256 billion industry, which is more than the GDP of Costa Rica.
$256 billion.
Yep.
As an industry to traffic or enslave people.
That's right.
And we think many times human trafficking as, moving somebody from a point to another, but the piece we don't think about is the enslavement.
Right.
And, the slave labor that people are caught into, even in the United States, it's happening.
Well, and I think that that's a really important point, Jeff, is that when we think about human trafficking, we do think of it often overseas only, right? Thailand or Cambodia or a different country. But it's happening in all 50 states, in all our zip codes, whether urban, rural, or suburban. And that's the component over the last 15 years that we have really focused on making sure that we make happen, which is to raise the level of awareness of human trafficking so that people say, oh, this could happen in my neighborhood. I need to be aware. I need to make sure that I understand what it is and what it isn't, because it's not just sex trafficking, it's labor trafficking, to your point.
Right.
And we often don't talk about that. Forced labor and commercial sexual exploitation are the two that we track in the United States, the National Trafficking Hotline does. And that's what we need to be able to make sure people understand is happening in our backyard.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to identify the sexual trafficking because we get that. We understand that. But the nature of the enslavement, and it could be as simple as somebody with their particular situation at home as a housekeeper.
That's right. That's right.
And so many less obvious ways that appear masked.
That's right. And, even someone who gets paid a little under the table but not a fair wage, right? Part of the reason we have minimum wage and we have the wages that we do in California as in different laws is so that people know what is a fair wage. And if someone isn't getting that and their labor is being exploited, it's labor trafficking. And so we need to be aware of that component too.
Tell me about the programs, because you've instituted a variety of things. Of course, over the last 15 years, the growth has been just immense in what I recall and the several times that we've spoken. Walk us through some of the prevention programs and the core programs of the organization.
Yeah. So originally when we began, it was prevention education. We started in 9th grade, actually in El Dorado County, just bringing education to the classroom. But we found very quickly that we needed some components. And this was leveraging my background in for-profit, right? Not only marketing, but data. We needed a protocol that was going to be designed for schools, because even if we went into a school, when we left a school, then what did the teacher and the staff and the administration do? How did they know how to respond?
What next?
Right? And we didn't want the kids to fall through the cracks. That was the most important piece from a missional component. So, it started that core component of protocol, training, education, and research. That was sort of the ground. And then it has now morphed into being called Protect, which is the Protect program, not just ninth grade, but kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. So that has been a flagship program for us from the beginning, and is scaled across the United States into many, many, many districts. And I think, too, as we look at that Protect program, it has influenced the other 7 programs that we now have as well. That includes a RISE, which is a juvenile justice program that's done in Texas mostly, a CARE program for caregivers, parents, and guardians. We also have BRAVE, which is for nonprofits if they wanted to have really efficient employment programs for their wraparound services. We also have Safe Life, which is for those who might have disabilities, who we want to make sure to increase protective factors for them specifically, and a couple others too. But our flagship in the education space is really the Protect program, which is a school-based program, and then I would say our Juvenile Justice RISE program.
And on the Protect program, you mentioned it's scattered throughout the country in a variety of different schools. I'm imagining school systems, school districts, et cetera.
Right.
How many states?
So I think in DAL, we're in 15 states, but we do have licensed facilitators in other states. So when you look at our map, it looks like almost there's someone in all 50 states who has either gone through the program or who has become a facilitator to deliver it. But we know we have districts and schools in 15 different states that are using it.
And this is for both the education of the student, to make the child aware of what to watch for, to say no to, et cetera, how to say it, and I'm imagining appropriately.
Yes.
As well as for the leadership, the schools, the teachers, and parents?
That's correct.
Okay.
So when you think about holistically, every program is we center missionally who is it we want to protect, who is it that we want to prevent, right? Because prevention is key and that's our focus. So student. So that means that we have teachers, counselors, social workers, administrators, everyone needs to be trained. We have a facilitator academy that someone can become a champion or an ambassador, if you will, who understands deeply not only the training but also the curriculum, kindergarten through 12th. And then we have an all-campus training that would make it so that everyone would have eyes and ears to see, to holistically protect that child. But then that one who goes deep has a deeper relationship with us, so that as we make updates and data that we give back to them, there's a relationship there that is built that it's not necessarily stronger, but is deeper in the level of understanding of the program as well as the outcomes that are coming out of that district.
Okay. And that program is a fee-for-service that they actually buy from you.
That's correct.
What is the specific orientation of the organization in our greater area?
Yeah.
And how big is our greater area that you're servicing?
Yeah, so 256 districts in California alone that we have been in. And it depends, sometimes we've been in Sacramento, they've lost funding and there's no ability to be able to pay. We are really good. Our staff is exceptional at going to find grants. So that's a space where we can partner with corporations or even service groups to be able to say, hey, if there's a grant for $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 or $100,000, this is how many we can reach. And we can walk alongside that grantor in order to deliver the prevention education too. So it doesn't only have to be fee-for-service from the district. In fact, in California, it's usually not. In California, we actually have the majority of grants that we have received. In other states, they have some different buckets that they pull from so that they can actually pay for it. But mostly it's grant provided.
That's amazing that you have the opportunity for various funding sources, wherever the situation may be, whether it's a different state or even in the state of California.
Well, and two, the other part is that back in 2019, one of my goals was to diversify revenue from a nonprofit perspective, because I'm a strong believer that nonprofits should be run as a business. And
and you're preaching to the choir. I think you're preaching to the choir at large for everybody listening to the episode as well.
Yes. And Dan Pallotta is a huge
Absolutely,
mentor
yes.
friend in the sense of I read everything and have been at so many different conferences with him and emailed him because I believe that, what nonprofits are sometimes strapped in this space of, the nonprofit space and indirect funds are important. And so I, like him, am a believer that 20 to 30% should be indirect to be able to do creative, innovative things. And our programming wouldn't exist if we didn't have indirect funds. And so when we look at a grant and even speak and build relationships with grantors, it's about how do we walk this together? We will absolutely, because we've tracked data from the very beginning, show you how the impact we're having. But how do we make sure, beyond a reasonable doubt, that that we're providing what we say we will, we have the impact we are, and that we have those discretionary funds that if something comes up that we didn't anticipate, we can cover.
Mm-hmm. To your point, let me be impossible to be misunderstood that these are businesses.
Yeah.
And we're talking about millions of dollars of businesses, in some cases, tens, 20s, hundreds.
That's right.
These are big business, and they have to be run properly and executed properly. And to think that this nonprofit moniker or tax status is a vow of poverty to work there is such a misnomer.
Very much.
It is such a misnomer, and we obviously encounter it often, especially the smaller organizations that are just struggling to get by. If they could reorient some of that and run it just a little bit differently depending on the board and how they're funded. Let's talk about collaboration a little bit, because you started to go down the path, and I just got excited. I don't want to get there ahead of myself, but you touch a lot of different organizations just by your existence.
Yeah.
Who do you find that you collaborate most with?
Wow, that's a great question. We nonprofits in the direct services realm. Here in Greater Sacramento, as well as the Bay, we have our direct services program. We have a lot of wonderful, deep relationships with nonprofits that work in this space, Weave and My Sister's House and Family Justice Center.
Right.
We also have the DA's office, as well as the courts, child welfare, so the government agencies as well when it comes to direct services. On the prevention education side, we work alongside other nonprofits who offer, whether it's after-school programming or are in the schools, in addition to the people who have been facilitators of the Protect program.
Yep.
But we also work with the school districts and the state level, whether it's the California State Board of Education or other states' Board of Education. We work alongside them too. So I think, one of the things that we just came talking about was this nonprofit model. I am a big believer of in abundance rather than scarcity. And I think that when we know without a doubt that we can't solve this problem by ourselves, and we truly believe that, then we come open-handed in an abundance fashion rather than scarcity. And I really believe, at least as it relates to human trafficking, we have to do that. Now, all of us are going to go after grants. We're all going to go after things. We know that's a competitive space, which in and of itself is just that. But it doesn't mean that we can't, with grantors, have a conversation around, could we do this collaboratively with one or two other agencies?
That's what I love to hear. And I think that's the changing face of nonprofits today. It's more the mission than the organization. Yep. And as we recognize that, the collaboration changes. And that competitive nature, you're right, you're seeing a bonding of sorts of multiple agencies going, hey, we all win. Right. In this case. It's not one, but it's collective. Right. And we're actually seeing collectives built to where they're collaborating to group themselves together so that they can have a distribution, and somebody maybe manages the administration part of it. Right. And the grant writing part of it. Right. But they all benefit because it's still about the mission. Right.
And we've had that in 3 different places, Jeff. In San Diego, we did a collective with 2 other nonprofits. It was funded by one funder over 4 years, and we worked together in all 41 districts in San Diego. And then we had an after-school program and a drama. We've done it here in Sacramento. with 2 other agencies, right? We do that all the time.
I'd love to hear that.
And we actually, even the Dignity Health Grant is that we have to apply with multiple agencies. So, it is, I believe, grantors understanding the longevity of a grant needs to be improved, as well as partnerships. I think those 2 places, if it's not just an annual thing, which I get is hard, but it helps us not to just have 1 year, but 2 or 3. And then the ability of that nonprofit to map out how do we sustain that then? Because you still have to be able to figure out where the money's going to come from after the grant ends.
Sustainability is so critical.
Right.
And we just had Chelsea firing for planned giving. And I don't want to get off track on that, but that's a part of it. And
Right.
it's a conscious decision and intention to move down that path. Again, it's tough when you're really small because you're doing everything and wearing so many hats, but when your organization starts to build a little bit better and it's a little bit larger, you've got some development resources, then you have the ability to really dive into these other areas of sustainability in so many different ways.
Right. Well, and I think we have 43 staff now. And the hardest thing for me, and I recognize this, is that from the beginning around my kitchen table, there were 4 of us. I have always worked in startups. So whether I take out the trash or I'm making a strategic decision, at 30,000 feet for the agency, I can go from one to the next because that's just been my historical career background. But to pull myself out of that, that's actually hard sometimes when you've got 43 staff. And now I don't need to be doing some of the stuff, operationally that I might have always done, and that someone else really to be able to empower them to be able to do that. I'm finding that transition has been an interesting journey.
Not uncommon for an entrepreneur to let go of the reins in some way, shape, or form, because more often than not, we'll screw it up.
Right, yeah.
We're holding it too tight.
Yes.
And we don't have all the answers.
No, and I think I have always believed, my grandmother instilled this in me. I'm a lifelong learner. Like there is nothing, not a day that goes by that I don't think about, wow, I just learned something new on this.
Right.
And to be curious is a huge piece of our culture, and not to be that this is the way it is and it'll never change. That's not who we are as an agency. It can't be, because that's not who we've always been. So
10 years or 15 years ago to today, just look at the difference. Look at the organization, the difference in the organization, but look at the not only the awareness, but sadly the volume of this crime. And it's not getting any better quicker. We really have to work at it, and to your point of prevention, just stay on it.
Right.
We'll be back with more from Ashlie Bryant of 3Strands Global right after this message from the people who make this program possible. I was in the media business for over 35 years and had the great privilege of working with Runyon Saltzman, RSE, Marketing, Advertising, and Public Relations. We collaborated on many different campaigns, but their commitment to the nonprofit sector hasn't changed since their founder, Gene Runyon, started the agency. Over many years and many campaigns, Runyon Saltzman has been committed to improving lives by tackling California's most challenging issues. Guided by research-informed strategies and insightful, creative solutions, RSE develops innovative communications campaigns that raise awareness, educate, and reduce stigma in diverse communities throughout our state and beyond. To learn more about RSE, visit rs-e.com.
Hello, this is Scott Thomas with Cap Trust in our Sacramento office. I specialize in working with local nonprofits and associations. Annually, we survey private and public nonprofit organizations across the country to better understand challenges they see in today's environment. In our more recent survey, we heard concerns about proper board governance, mission-aligned investment, and how to implement alternative investments. If you would like a copy of the survey or to discuss your organization, look me up, Scott Thomas at captrust.com.
I'm thrilled to have Western Health Advantage partnering with us as they do so much to support so many nonprofit agencies in our community. As a truly local health plan, you'll find individual and family options, employer options, plans for CalPERS and Medicare Advantage. From medical services to pharmacy, health and wellness support, as well as behavioral health care, Western Health Advantage has a plan that fits what you need. As an employer, for profit or nonprofit business, individual or family, you can find more at westernhealth.com. Funding, you started to talk a little bit about that in terms of the organization. How are you funded?
So the majority right now, more than 50% is grant funds. So whether that's state, federal, or corporate, family foundation, that's sort of a grant. And then the remainder is, individual donors, monthly donors, one-time campaigns, end-of-the-year campaigns, things like that.
Okay. And then, of course, your fee-for-service stuff that you actually share and charge out into the other states.
Yes.
Which I love that, because it really is giving you a spread and a depth of distribution in revenue that you're not reliant on one or two places and things, which again is challenging. If something changes, the budget changes. I mean, we know in the state of California, it's been challenging, is going to get more challenging.
That's correct.
And
the other piece too is that things like COVID happen.
Yes.
Right. And so I've always said since day one, if I get hit by a bus, right, tomorrow, then we want to make sure beyond a shadow of a doubt that the good work that's happening by this agency continues to happen. So how do we set it up for success in that space to make that happen? And here's the other thing we don't talk about very often, but I actually think is really interesting is how do you merge or acquire to be able to for best practices with other agencies. In the movement this last year, there were 9 different individual nonprofits that have merged into 3. And so 3 came together in 3 different places. So that's an interesting conversation too. You don't hear about it often, but it is something that I think, at least for the movement of anti-trafficking work, is something that we're seeing evolve.
Well, and 2 things. Keyman Insurance. We can't have you get hit by a bus tomorrow.
Yeah, no.
And secondly, is that mergers and acquisitions back to business.
That's right.
As businesses grow and see opportunities, and there's an opportunity to look at another agency that's fulfilling something that you could use as a service or need, why start it?
Right.
If there's a way that you can merge the 2.
Yes. And that's so important. If someone's listening and they're thinking, I want to start a nonprofit, go research who does what now. Because there's usually someone who's doing it. And to have we have 16,000 nonprofits, I think, in Sacramento.
13,000.
Something. Yeah. And so make sure if something exists, go have a conversation, have lunch, have coffee to be able to see what might be in alignment so that there's not another nonprofit out there, but doing what we can do missionally together.
And to your point, we do get calls, can I come on the program? I've got a new nonprofit. And we have some criteria, 2 years as an agency and or 2 years as the executive director, leadership, whatever it may be. And then the second question is, if you're a newer nonprofit, what are you doing and why?
Yeah.
And do you know there's 14 others that look just like this? Why don't you take your talents and time over to that organization?
That's right.
And benefit them?
Well, and even more for us, feasibility studies are super important. So, prevention education was prevention was the focus. Education was sort of the jumping off. But in 2016, we had a meeting downtown where we were asked to come up with an employment strategy for around the Golden One Center. And how could we make sure around, it was a mile or 5 miles around, that there were jobs for vulnerable populations? Well, the very first response was, that's all well and good, but we know a lot of really great NGOs that have employment programs right now.
NGOs?
Nonprofit and non-governmental agent or organizations.
Organizations, okay.
Yeah. So nonprofits.
Yes.
And so we don't want to take away from that. We want to make sure. So what we did was not only have conversations with them and make sure that, some had coffee shops, some had thrift shops, but there was a hole, and we saw it through our feasibility study, or a gap of having, jobs in, hospitality or healthcare or office jobs or customer support and service, right? Technology, those types of things. So in 2016, we started Employ Plus Empower, which is our direct services program, because going back to your point about don't just jump in, because we did this feasibility study, there was a gap from a business perspective.
Yeah.
Then we could actually fulfill a need. And we've had a wait list from 2016 till today. So we know that it
Employers looking for employees?
Employees, survivors, our clients looking for a job are on our wait list because we have so many that we don't have enough case managers to be able to do wraparound services.
Well, see, that's amazing to be able to have that volume of people to know that there's a resource.
Yep.
And I think just this conversation for employers looking for people who didn't know that existed, here's another opportunity.
That's right. Yeah, 3Strands can be that. We've got relationships with employers in the greater 5, counties around Sacramento, purposely to place our clients into sustainable jobs. That's what
Right.
this Survivor Services program was all about in 2016. Was at first just around the Golden One Center, but it expanded to all 5 counties around.
Oh, I can easily see how that would happen. Once you've got that thing started, it's just, oh, by the way.
That's right.
In terms of that, let's talk just a bit about proof of performance.
Yes.
Because we look at, so often we'll see an organization, how are they doing? What is the metric that they're measuring their success by? And you actually are servicing 2 different areas. One is the prevention. We'll talk about it in a second because that's the tougher of the 2. But one is the student or the victim of trafficking and their holistic health. How do we know what's happening with them? How do you know what's happening with them?
Yeah. So we see, prevention's the umbrella. Education is one side for 3Strands, and then reintegration is what we call the other, which is the employment piece. So my background is, like I shared, marketing, and in that, data was always a piece of it.
Right.
So 3Strands, whether they liked it or not, or we liked it as an agency, that was going to be a piece of what we did. So from the very beginning, we have both quantitative and qualitative data that we have been tracking. Before COVID, we started researching using natural language processing and AI to actually help us with our qualitative and quantitative data. So not only on the direct services side do we track the qualitative data or that may be the client or our case manager is sharing with us, but we actually designed a model to show us when that client goes from crisis to thriving and different levels. So they might go from crisis to building capacity to stability to thriving, right? And that journey. And we know that from the qualitative data analysis that we've done. And we can tweak our programming based off of what we're getting from a data perspective back to us as well. So when we look at impact, we say, okay, in the categories that our client might come in, so childcare, transportation, housing, basic needs, employment, education, where are they in that trajectory of crisis to thriving? And how are we actually getting our qualitative data in, put it through our model, and then we can be able to assess. We probably need to do a little work on basic skills. Maybe we add a couple courses for our clients, our survivor clients, so that they can understand better how to XYZ, right? Whatever that might
better
be.
reintegration. The more you can teach, the more likely they are to get the job.
Exactly. But having that model for us has been a game changer from the very beginning of quantitative and qualitative, then add AI and natural language processing, because it helps us sooner know exactly where we are on target. I can always see how many services have we provided by month. I can see how many clients we've actually served every single month. But to understand the quantitative or the qualitative data and the themes of what we're seeing along with crisis to thriving helps to holistically serve that client better.
Now the prevention side.
Yes.
And this is the tough one. We were talking about this right before we started. Either because it's just growing so much and so rapidly, because you can't really gauge it. We only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know.
Right.
Talk a little bit, at least, about what we can identify.
Right.
That we know we're making some semblance of an impact and how we would gauge it.
Yeah. So we don't know the prevalence of human trafficking in the United States. There was a study in 2016 by the University of Texas in Austin, just for Texas. And, all studies have like naysayers and people who are like, yay, this is great. So that study happened to reveal that there were over 300,000 victims of human trafficking just in Texas. That's enormous, right?
300,000?
Yes.
300,000.
Right. And up until
that's about a 30 million population state-ish.
Yeah.
10% of the population.
Right. Just in Texas. So imagine California, New York, and Illinois, Florida. Right? Because Texas doesn't have the most, according to the National Trafficking Hotline, victims and or survivors who are calling in for services or to be recovered, right? So if you have a state like California, does that mean we have 500,000? Does that mean we have more than that, right?
Certainly more because of just our border situation, and we know.
Potentially. So, but because a study of prevalence hasn't been done, long ago, we looked at 3Strands that we needed to be able to look at our programming specifically in the impact to your question of what impact was it having in a school district. So take a smaller group, if you will, or a community, right? Get it down from a state or a nation, go smaller to community. And so we implemented not only pre and post for in the school-based program for our teachers and administrators, counselors, et cetera, but also students, so that we could see quantitatively what are we seeing in in terms of behavior change, increased knowledge, and then increased recognition of signs. So when we measure those three things from a quantitative perspective, and then in addition, we add in the qualitative piece, to be able to also look for those three things, then we can overlay them and we can say, okay, our teachers are by 72% saying that they see behavior change in their classrooms as well as themselves. Wow, that's a great thing.
Right.
That means that they are changing their behavior, understanding trauma, and making different choices with their students. So their students now feel safer potentially, and their students maybe also feel empowered in different ways, right? The behavior component is a part of it. Awareness and signs and knowledge is a different piece. But, we're taking it at the local level, if you will, in that space of prevention education to be able to truly look and see how are we impacting that community, and then giving that back to them too, so that they can see how we impact the community, and then measuring. And this is hard, but one of our schools, the counselor came back to us and said, wow, we can give you right away. The student was online with someone that they shouldn't have been. And because of the curriculum told us this, we were able to get on that immediately and stop that child from being trafficked and stop the exploitation from happening, which had already, the grooming process had already started, right? Grooming that child to trust, grooming that child to be exploited or trafficked. So the fact that we know, and that's just one example of many, but that's one where you can say, okay, so us measuring allowed us to understand that better.
That's empirical.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I was traveling over the Halloween period and was in Illinois, Chicago area for the airport, and then into Minnesota. I've never seen the signs on the back of bathroom stalls and, in the airport on marquees of say something. And to your credit, that in itself is awareness,
Yes.
And working on prevention. But beyond that, by people saying something now gives us a metric to start to identify, okay, now they're talking and we're hearing about it.
Right.
And that's pre-victimization. That's
right.
pre-trafficking, which I think is going to make it look worse initially because it's just all the information and volume of information coming in that we didn't know what we didn't know.
Right.
Now that we know it, we're starting to get a baseline where we can identify what's happening and that the prevention is working.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's the first time I've seen that. So something is certainly occurring.
Yes. Well, and I think that you will now, our flight attendants are trained. Transportation, when it comes to Truckers Against Trafficking, that's a nonprofit that we've been, known about and aligned with, over time. There's different industries that traffickers are going to create and run their business. And like you had said earlier, it's not about just staying, where they are. They will go to different locations. They will take that victim to different locations across the United States, sometimes just locally. But it's important for all of us to be aware at that level. So the awareness piece is important, right? That's our engagement of our 3 E's. Is to make sure we have a public awareness for folks, whether it's on the back of stalls in bathrooms or it is campaigns that we talk about what is human trafficking. And we have a HT 101 that is available on our website that if you go, you can actually understand what human trafficking is from a 101 level. And when you're out in the world, you'll be able to recognize it and alert the National Trafficking Hotline.
And HT, Human Trafficking 101.
Yeah. HT.
Took me a minute. You kept going, so I caught it right away.
Yeah.
We talked about the funding. What is your total budget?
At the end of this fiscal, which will be June 30, it'll be $5 million.
Congratulations. That is an astounding amount to think you started with nothing.
Yeah.
Just 15 years ago. You mentioned 43 staff. You are across the country in 15 different states. You are making an impact in so many different ways. What if budget were no option?
You mean if money disappeared?
What would it look like? What would the organization look like if you had all the money you needed?
Oh, if we had all the money,
all the money
we
you
needed.
needed. Yeah. What would you
my
do?
goodness.
What would it look like?
You're talking to an entrepreneur who
I know,
is
that's
all
why
about innovation. So the vision for 3Strands is a world free from human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
So if I had all the money in the world, I would design even more within the 4 Ps. So prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships are the 4 areas of focus in the
Mm-hmm.
anti-trafficking world across actually the globe.
Mm-hmm.
So we fall it within the protection and prevention side. So I would build out probably even more data components using AI and natural language processing to get prevalence, to be able to have an understanding even deeper at the impact that we're having with our programs. Holistically looking at more programs from a prevention perspective. What are those places and those vulnerabilities and communities that are vulnerable that we're not reaching right now, that we could just offer all of this for free and not have anybody even do free fee for service? If I had all the money in the world,
Right.
I would do that for sure. Because there are vulnerable population school districts that certainly we are looking for grant funds immediately, but if I didn't even need to look and that time could be spent building or improving, the programs that we have. The other thing that I would do is probably, I don't know, I might even take and say, who are the other players that are out in the world and how can we consolidate and make it so that we're a combined force and use those funds to be able to get the workforce to a place that's competitive with the outside world, because nonprofit, we know, is not paid at the same rate as for-profit. And get some folks in to be able to look at that holistically across the nation and maybe even the globe.
Do we know geographically, globally, where the hot spots are? Where are they?
So it globally is different than the U.S. So I'll talk about globally first. So what I talked about, Thailand, Cambodia, some of those places, Philippines, those are hot places in the world that need a true focus because the victim is usually younger in overseas. One of the 3Strands has the UN consultative status, and by 2030, the UN would like everyone to have access online. We think that's great. However, we need to not open Pandora's box and make sure that those who would have nefarious things for children in the Philippines or Thailand or anywhere else wouldn't have access online to some child in some remote village to be able to exploit them and pay them, right? There's a whole lot of that already that happens. We don't want to even open it more. So let's make sure we have good things, checks in place. So from a global perspective, I would just, that is what I would share with you. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen in other countries, for sure. In the U.S., there's a heat map that we have even on our website that people can check out. And California obviously has the most. The 3 cities, it's San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, New York, Illinois, Florida. Those are sort of the top, which you think because we're the most populated states. But again, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen in North Dakota or South Dakota or New Mexico or Arizona, right? But those happen to be the ones that have most.
Back to reality, where there is a budget. What's the greatest need?
We have a wait list, right? It's waivers between usually around 60 to 90 people. So those are just survivor clients who want to be able to have sustainable jobs. And our case managers manage anywhere from 20 to 30 clients at a time. So that means hiring those extra people, whether that's 2 to 3 people. So that to me is a great need. We have a drop-in center now, the table.
That was a very next question.
Oh, good.
That's big news because that just happened.
Yes, it did. January 31st, we opened the table, which is the drop-in center downtown H Street, which is
a brick and mortar facility for people to come to.
That's right. It has laundry, it has a kitchen, it has a food pantry, a clothing closet, case management rooms, mental health, as well as wellness rooms, a shower, all of those things. It's a drop-in center. And we have referrals that come from our partners, but we also have those who drop in. And we have a toy drive that's happening this next week for those who are on our caseload. But the greatest need is, let's get those wait list people off the wait list. And that means we have to have a full-time employee to be able to meet the needs of those individuals.
How about a success story or two?
Yeah.
There's somebody that's come through the program that was trafficked in some way, shape, or form. went through is maybe now gainfully employed as a result of a placement that you made, or just something from A to Z?
Yeah, lots of those.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so many. In fact, almost 1,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we have served almost 1,000 survivors and placed them into sustainable jobs, our clients. And that can range from someone coming in 16 and up, so 16 years old to 80 years old. Might be someone who may be a client. And, a trajectory of meeting with our case manager, walking through the door at the table, or meeting them from a referral that comes from another agency, hospitality job, where we place in a local hotel, whether it's customer support I can think of, or marketing, or has been a trajectory for lots of different clients who come through our doors. Healthcare is another one. Phlebotomy. Those who want to be techs, healthcare techs who come through the door and go through and work with our case manager on what does it mean to build a resume? And if I have been exploited or trafficked, how do I make sure that I even know what an interview should look like? And what are some of those skills that I need as I walk into that interview? What are those soft skills that I need to communicate? What does conflict resolution look like? How do I make sure that I can do that? We stay with our clients for a certain amount of time after they have their job so that we can make sure that if there's anything that comes up, that we can address it and walk them through that. And then the other piece is we have a program called TRUE, which is Trauma Response and Understanding for Employers. And that program is offered for employers so they understand trauma. And we never out our clients at all. The reason we did trauma was so that anybody can experience trauma, and not just trafficking, but it could be anything, right?
Sure.
And so an employer would understand how best to be trauma-informed and while that individual client is being placed at their business. So lots of different success stories. I never really talk about one because I never want to be able to highlight just one individual, but
Right.
There are 1,000 almost who we have placed and had the opportunity to empower and walk alongside.
Well, and that TRUE program actually envelops a variety of different things. As you mentioned, various traumas.
That's right.
That's to the benefit of the employer, not only for your particular placement, but they can take advantage of that to any situation. In so many cases, so many people that have some semblance of trauma that's impacted them and can impact their performance at work.
That's right. And when you think about it, if I'm an employer and I have so many different HR programs that I need to offer my staff, that one, it helps not only from a team perspective, but it helps the individual understand, wow, this person may have experienced trauma, and so how I show up looks different.
In both ways, for both the employer and the employee. And it's a sense of confidence for the employee, too, to know that their employer cares.
Right.
And without the state telling us we have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or charging us for having to do it.
Yes, yes.
Ashlie, what's the best way to learn more about the organization, to reach out?
Yeah, so our website is a great place to be able to go. We have all of our staff on there and email addresses that people can connect with. If it's a client or a survivor client, the drop-in center is a great place to go, as well as we have on our website if you need help now, so that they can actually get that immediately. And then if they're interested in any of the prevention education programs, which there are 8 now, to reach out to our staff, which is on the website as well. To be able to know. What's
the web URL?
Yeah, it's www. and then the number 3, S is in Strands, Global GF Foundation.org. So SGF, 3SGF.org, or you can write out 3strandsglobalfoundation.org.
And I'll put it in the show notes as well so anybody can find it just by clicking there. But helpful for somebody who's driving and hears and says, okay, I need to know where to go.
Yes.
Because I'm curious.
Well, and the other piece too is not only the website, but we have, like right now is the end of the year campaign.
Yes.
I talked about the wait list. We would love for people to engage in that space and help us to be able to draw down off that wait list. And this is a perfect time as people close out the year to be able to think about their gifts, to be able to give.
And your website's a little bit unique. You have a beautiful mural-esque graphic on there, but if you do nothing else on the website, go there and move your cursor around on it because it's like puffs of smoke moving throughout the graphic. It's one of the neatest things I've seen on a website graphic.
Yeah, and all kudos to our marketing team. They have done a beautiful job of building that website. And the mural that you see on the homepage is actually the mural on the back of our building. So, and it's called Blossoms of Resilience.
And that's the table?
That's the
Now,
table.
what's the address of the table?
1211 H Street.
Okay, so it's 1211 H Street, downtown Sacramento.
Yes.
Ashlie, what you and your team are doing is so incredibly important and necessary in putting a dent in a horrific situation. And with Sacramento being an immigrant-rich city, we obviously have too many opportunities for trafficking to occur.
Yeah.
But you're making a difference. You're saving our children from the hands of these guys that are, we're going to edit that. You're making a difference in saving our children from the hands of the people that are so intent on getting hold of the most vulnerable.
Yes.
So thank you for your efforts, your success over these past 15 years.
Yes.
And to you and your team in building such an incredible organization that I hope to see it influence all the states, not just 15 over the course of the next 10 years.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That means a whole lot to me. It has been an amazing journey for sure. And I'm so humbled to have been a part of it. And I think for me, it's always about hope, right? This is a heinous, heinous crime. And so there are many days I drive up my driveway and I just cry or scream, thinking about, the things that have happened, whether we've heard about in our programming and or across the nation from a prevention education in that programming. But I end in the driveway or in the garage thinking, okay, so let's think about the hope of what happened today, because there are so many stories at 3Strands of hope, and that's our focus, right? How do we make sure that we have a world free from human trafficking, that we can mobilize communities to help us combat it, and we focus on hope?
As an empath, obviously,
Yes.
For the individual, and as the leader of the organization, hence the frustration, the ability to see hope through that is something that clearly resonates and translates to your staff and to everything that they do.
Yeah.
So as tough and difficult as it can be emotionally when you're sitting in that driveway, thank you for being that person, because what you've built is an incredible organization that's making a difference.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Podcast Network. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If what you heard moved you, please reach out to that organization and do what you can to help. If you like and appreciate what we're doing to support local nonprofits, please give us a positive review, subscribe, and share. If you're a nonprofit with an interest in participating in an episode, you can reach me at jeff@hearmenowstudio.com. If you have a need for the services or products our sponsors offer, please reach out to them. CapTrust, fiduciary advice for endowments and foundations. Runyon Saltzman Incorporated, RSE, marketing, advertising, and public relations, creating integrated communications committed to improving lives. And Western Health Advantage, a full-service healthcare plan for individuals, employer groups, and families. The Nonprofit Podcast Network is a production of, is recorded at, and edited by Hear Me Now Studio.